Tamika stops at a gas station dressed in full military uniform. She just wants to refuel before heading to drill. Two white officers approach. Their eyes are suspicious, even though Tamika is clearly in uniform and holding military ID. Without any real investigation, one officer cuffs Tamika. Her arms are twisted back, her face tense but calm. In the back seat of the police cruiser, Tamika demands her right to call. Her voice is calm. She knows exactly who to call. "Byron, I've been cuffed. They think I'm faking my uniform," she says. On the other end, Colonel Byron Keene goes into action. People begin filming with their phones. A nurse in scrubs yells, "She's military, you idiots!" A black lieutenant arrives. Without many words, he opens the cruiser door and removes Tamika's cuffs himself. The video of Tamika being cuffed in full uniform went viral within hours. Calm but ignored, she became a symbol of injustice. Outrage erupted. Cuffed in uniform trended. Under pressure, both officers were fired within a day. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next powerful story. Chapter 1. The road to drill. The chill of morning still clung to the pavement as Sergeant Tamika Drury backed her dark green RAV-4 out of her driveway in Gahanna, Ohio. The sky was still more blue-gray than gold, and most of the neighborhood was asleep, except her. She'd been up since 5 a.m., pressing her fatigues, packing her duffel, and preparing for another routine drill weekend at the reserve base in Whitehall. Routine. That was the word. This wasn't combat. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't glory. It was structure. And structure had kept Tamika grounded for 12 years. As the car rolled down familiar streets, her mind went over her mental checklist. Gas tank, low, breakfast, skipped, ID, orders, gear, check, check, check. She'd stop for gas and grab something quick before hitting the highway. Her GPS didn't even need to speak anymore. She knew every curve of the road between her home and the base by heart. The Sinclair station on Morse Road wasn't the best in town. It sat behind a shuttered laundromat and a faded Dollar General, and the lot had more potholes than pavement. But it was convenient, and more importantly, it was open. As she pulled in, her RAV-4 hissed slightly from the cold, the engine settling as she shifted into park. Tamika stepped out, her boots hitting the ground with the solid rhythm of someone used to being on schedule. Her duffel was in the back seat, upright and packed with precision. She adjusted the Velcro patch on her chest that read Drury and walked toward the pump. She inserted her card, selected regular unleaded, and let the handle click into place. A soft buzz vibrated in her coat pocket. Her mother. "Be safe. Text me when you're on base." Tamika smiled, always before a drill. She opened a protein bar, took a bite, and typed back a quick, "All good." Fueling up. The pump chugged quietly. The lot was empty. The air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. Being in uniform always gave her a sense of calm, a reminder that she had a purpose, even when the rest of the world felt chaotic. She was screwing the gas cap back on when she heard the low growl of tires over gravel. A black and white Chevy Tahoe pulled into the lot and stopped 2 pumps over. Tamika glanced at it once, and then turned away. No reason to notice it. No reason at all. But inside that Tahoe were 2 uniformed police officers from a neighboring suburb. One was younger, probably mid-30s, buzz-cut and lean. The other older, bulkier, wearing mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. The younger one pointed, said something. The older one shrugged, then leaned back. Tamika didn't notice. Not right away. She was already back at the driver's side, checking her phone and finishing her protein bar. Her breath curled into the cold air like smoke, and for a brief moment, everything felt still. Then, "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned. "Yes, officer?" The younger one had approached. No greeting, no smile. Just that tone, the kind that didn't ask questions but expected obedience. Tamika blinked, confused. "Is something wrong? Can you step away from the vehicle, please?" The word please didn't sound like a request. Tamika's stomach tightened. Her hands moved slowly and visibly as she stepped back from the door. "I'm Army Reserve," she said calmly. "On my way to base. I have my ID." She reached into her pocket, pulling out her military ID in one hand, her driver's license in the other. She held them out, side by side, like she'd done dozens of times before when showing credentials at checkpoints or during travel. The officer barely looked at them. "This uniform's not a costume," she added quietly, almost instinctively. The younger officer's eyes narrowed. "Who said it was?" Tamika didn't respond. "Got a call about someone loitering and acting suspicious," he continued. "Just doing our job." She bit the inside of her cheek. The older officer was still by the Tahoe, arms crossed, silent, watching. "You sure this ID is legit?" Tamika blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." She inhaled sharply. "You think I'm impersonating military personnel?" He didn't answer. He just stepped closer. "Turn around." "Are you detaining me?" His voice rose. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful command. Turn around. Hands behind your back." She looked again to the older officer, searching for a flicker of reason or doubt in his face. Nothing. Just a nod. She clenched her fists. "This is a mistake," she said, "and it's going to cost you." But the cuffs were already coming out. And just like that, everything routine about the morning shattered. Chapter 2. Hands behind your back. The cold metal tightened around her wrists with a distinct, merciless click. Not once, but twice. Tamika didn't resist. She didn't shout or struggle. She just stood still, silent, composed, while the younger officer locked the cuffs with unnecessary force. Her breath formed small, steady clouds in the morning air, but inside, heat had started to rise. Not from fear, from fury. The world didn't spin. It sharpened. The gas station's low hum fell away. All Tamika could hear was her own heartbeat and the distant whir of traffic beyond Morse Road. As the officer pushed her toward the cruiser, she caught the eyes of a woman sitting in a parked car nearby. Their gazes locked for just a second. The woman looked horrified. Tamika looked back without blinking. Her name tag was now askew from how they'd gripped her arm. Her ID was still in the officer's hand, or maybe on the ground, stepped on. She wasn't sure. She didn't look down. The older cop opened the rear door of the cruiser. He still hadn't said a word. The silent one was always the most dangerous in her experience. The one who watched, the one who approved silently. He didn't need to say anything. He had let it happen. They pushed her inside. No Miranda rights, no explanation. Just slammed steel and synthetic vinyl pressing into her back. The door shut behind her with a finality that echoed louder than any scream. Tamika sat upright. She refused to slump. She refused to shrink. Her hands were still cuffed behind her, elbows aching against the unforgiving plastic of the cruiser seat. Through the tinted glass, she could see the younger officer pacing near her vehicle, her RAV-4. He circled it like a hunter who thought he'd caught something dangerous. His expression was smug. Her duffel bag was still in the back seat of her car. Untouched, neatly packed, just like her record. Tamika's jaw clenched tighter. There were so many things she could have said. So many ways she could have exploded with rage. But none of those would serve her now. She didn't need rage. She needed precision. She needed authority. She needed to remind them that she was not some helpless bystander or criminal in disguise. She was a soldier. Her voice rang out, loud enough to pierce the barrier between the back seat and the front. "I want to call my commanding officer." No response. Just the officer flipping through something on the front console. "You'll get your call at the station," he muttered. "That's not how this works," Tamika shot back, her tone calm but laced with steel. "Military personnel have the right to notify command immediately when detained. I am on active orders this weekend. You're interfering with military operations." That got his attention. He turned halfway in his seat, glancing at her through the mesh divider. "You're being held under suspicion of impersonating military personnel," he said flatly. "That's a federal offense." "Then treat it like one," Tamika snapped. "Verify my credentials properly. Instead, you ignored my ID and put me in cuffs like I'm nobody." Silence. Then the officer turned back toward the front. But Tamika wasn't done. "You're pretending this isn't racial profiling," she said, louder now. "But you and I both know what this is." From the driver's seat, the older officer glanced up into the rearview mirror. Their eyes met. He said only 5 words. "You should have just kept quiet." Tamika leaned forward as far as the cuffs would let her, voice low but lethal. "You should have just done your job right." There was a pause. Then the older one reached down into the console and pulled out her phone, probably retrieved from her jacket or seat during the arrest. He dropped it onto her lap without unlocking the cuffs. "Make it quick." She twisted sideways, managing to tap the screen with the edge of her thumb. Face ID failed once, then again. The third time, she got it. She swiped up, tapped a single number, favorited, highlighted in yellow. It rang twice. "Drury?" The voice on the other end was sharp, alert. "Byron," she said, "I'm cuffed in the back of a police cruiser off Morse. 2 officers. They're accusing me of impersonating military. I showed ID. They didn't care." There was a beat of silence. "Who's the arresting officer?" "They haven't given names. No badges shown. White Tahoe, Sinclair gas station. I'm 5 minutes from base." His tone changed instantly. "I'm calling command. Keep the line open." She didn't hang up. She just held the phone on her lap, speaker still hot, line still active. She wanted them to know someone was listening, that someone with real authority had just been looped in. The younger officer passed the window again, saw her holding the phone. "Who was that?" "Your boyfriend?" he said mockingly. Tamika didn't blink. "Try Colonel Byron Keene, 3rd Battalion Logistics." That made him stop mid-step. "You're about to learn his name very well." Chapter 3. Someone's Watching. The younger officer's face shifted, barely, but noticeably. His jaw tensed. His hand, which had been casually resting on the car's doorframe, pulled away. Colonel Byron Keene. That name wasn't just a bluff, and something in Tamika's tone made it clear. She wasn't bluffing either. From her lap, Byron's voice came through the speaker again, calm but tight with command. "I hear voices. Who's speaking to you now?" Tamika raised her voice slightly, her eyes locked on the younger cop outside the cruiser. "Still the officer pacing around like he cracked a damn terrorist plot." The officer flinched at that. Inside the cruiser, Tamika repositioned herself as best she could with her hands cuffed behind her. She was uncomfortable, sure, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of looking small. Outside, the wind picked up. The cold bit deeper, and with it came a growing buzz of attention. People had started to gather. The first was a woman in blue scrubs, probably on her way to an early shift, who had parked at a nearby pump and hadn't driven off since. Then came a young man in a hoodie with a phone already recording. Another car pulled in, slowed, and stopped without fueling. The crowd wasn't big, not yet, but it was forming. From within the cruiser, Tamika could see the nurse lift her phone. She wasn't just watching now. She was filming. The younger cop noticed too. He walked over to his partner, leaned in, and whispered something. Tamika couldn't hear it, but she could read the discomfort in his posture. "We're getting heat," he muttered just loudly enough as he passed the window again. "Somebody already posted video. It's hitting Facebook." Tamika exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but out of recognition. This was how it began, not with press conferences, not with apologies. It began when people saw. "5 minutes out," came Byron's voice again through the phone. "I've contacted your base commander and dispatch. Keep the line open." She didn't respond, just nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Another voice shouted from across the lot. Why's she in cuffs? That's a soldier. The crowd had grown. 3, maybe 5 people now, all with phones out, all watching. The older officer, Linford, she'd later learn, stood rigid, arms crossed. But the tension in his jaw betrayed his calm. His eyes scanned the onlookers. They weren't in control anymore, and they knew it. The younger cop opened the cruiser door halfway. "You need to watch your mouth, lady." Tamika turned slowly, her face neutral. "Or what? You'll tighten the cuffs? Slam the door harder?" Before he could reply, the older officer barked from the side, "That's enough." It was unclear who he meant, his partner or Tamika, maybe both, maybe neither. Still, the younger one pulled back. The cruiser door closed again with a loud thunk. Inside, Tamika tilted her head, letting the red-blue flicker of siren lights wash over her face. She knew how it looked from the outside, she knew what was being recorded, and she knew how the internet worked. Byron's voice came again, firmer this time. "They're stalling, trying to regroup. I've got 3 calls active: Public Affairs, Base Command, and City Oversight. Do not say anything else. Let them bury themselves." Tamika almost smiled. Outside, things were changing fast. The nurse in scrubs shouted again, "I've got the whole thing on video. She told y'all she was military. She had ID." The younger officer snapped his head in her direction. "Back off, ma'am. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," the nurse fired back. The crowd responded, not with cheers, but with energy. That unspoken momentum of people who had seen this story too many times, who knew when something smelled wrong. Their silence wasn't passive. It was loaded. More phones were raised. One man called out, "What's her name? What's the charge?" No answer. A car passing by honked, twice, hard. Then a new vehicle entered the lot. A marked SUV, different from the cruiser. Its doors opened slowly. Out stepped a tall black man in a lieutenant's uniform, mid-40s, buzz-cut, unreadable face. He didn't look at the crowd, he didn't speak to the officers. He walked directly to the cruiser, tapped twice on the back window, and met Tamika's eyes. She blinked, then nodded. He opened the door himself. "Sergeant Drury." "Yes, sir." "I've been informed by Colonel Keene and reviewed the footage in real time." His tone was measured, clipped. "We're correcting this now." He stepped aside, reached in carefully, and unlocked her cuffs. Tamika stood slowly, rubbing her wrists as the cold air hit her full again. She didn't say anything. Not yet. The younger officer stood frozen. The older one finally looked away. The lieutenant looked at her, voice low. "On behalf of this department, I apologize." Tamika didn't respond. Not with words. She turned her head toward the 2 officers who had detained her. She locked. Chapter 4. The calm before the fire. By the time Sergeant Tamika Drury stood beside her SUV again, the sun had fully risen over Morse Road. But for her, the morning felt darker than ever. The cuffs were off, but the weight of what had happened lingered like frost that refused to melt. The lieutenant who had freed her stood nearby, speaking in low tones into his radio. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but not before every angle of the incident had been captured. Not before every phone had recorded her calm voice, the officer's dismissiveness, the moment she said, "You're just caught." Those 3 words were now echoing online. Tamika opened the driver's side door of her RAV4. Her hands, though free, still ached. She sat down slowly, her eyes lingering on the side mirror. The same officers were still there, silent, unsure, their badges heavy with consequence. Her phone buzzed. "Byron." "You good?" he asked without preamble. "Free," Tamika replied. "Embarrassed, but free." There was a pause. Then Byron said, "You're more than that. You're visible now." Tamika exhaled through her nose. She didn't want visibility. She wanted her quiet back. But quiet had left the station hours ago. Across town, inside a local newsroom, A young editor named Reina Cortez stared at her screen. The footage had been sent to her 3 times by different sources. She played it again, Tamika standing in uniform, offering her ID, then being cuffed. The moment was clear, sharp, undeniable. "Run it," she told the producer beside her. "Lead with it." Within the hour, the story aired across local broadcasts. Army reservist handcuffed in uniform. Was it racial profiling? The segment was short, but it spread like dry leaves in wind. By noon, national outlets were calling. Hashtag number cuffed in uniform was trending. On social media, people weren't debating. They were demanding. This woman risked her life for this country, and they saw a threat. They ignored her ID. They ignored her voice. They only saw her skin. Imagine being trained to take bullets for a nation that won't take a moment to verify your credentials. Meanwhile, inside the police department, chaos brewed beneath the surface. The PR director was on speaker with the chief, the mayor's office, and 2 legal advisors. "We need to release a statement," the PR director urged. "We need to delay," the chief countered. "Let it cool off." "It won't," someone else interjected. "Not this time." In the break room, Dorsey and Linford sat side by side, each pretending the other wasn't there. Linford said nothing, just stared at the floor. Dorsey rubbed his temples. "We got a call. We followed protocol." "Did you?" came a voice from the door. It was internal affairs. Later that afternoon, they were brought into separate interviews. The footage was played, line by line, frame by frame. Every word they said, every time they ignored what was in front of them. Every moment they treated a uniformed soldier as a suspect. And then came the body cam audio. Unmuted seconds after the arrest, caught clearly. Dorsey: "You think she's one of those fake vets? They've been pulling that all year." Linford, chuckling: "Real or not, she had an attitude. Let her cool off in the car." The room went still. There was nothing more to say. That evening, Tamika sat on her porch in silence. Her uniform was still on. She hadn't changed, hadn't eaten. Her mother had called 3 times. She hadn't picked up. The weight of the day hadn't sunk in yet, not fully. Her phone lit up again. A new message. Unknown number. "Thank you. I saw your video. I'm a nurse. I was there. You didn't say a single angry word and they still treated you like a threat." That shook me. Tamika read it twice, then locked the screen. She looked up at the sky, which had gone soft with evening clouds. The same sky she'd driven under that morning, thinking it was just another drill day. Far across the street, someone had left a single candle near the Sinclair gas station sign. She hadn't seen who placed it. She didn't need to. The story wasn't just hers anymore. Chapter 5. The video that wouldn't go away. At first, it was just one clip, 92 seconds long, posted by a teenager who had been at the gas station, recording from the back seat of his friend's car. Tamika didn't even know the video existed, until it was everywhere. The clip started with her standing beside her SUV, holding her military ID. The audio was shaky but clear. Her voice was calm, stating who she was, where she was going, and that she was Army Reserve. It caught the officer's tone as he interrupted her, grabbed her arm, and turned her around. You could hear the cuffs click. It caught the crowd shouting. It caught the nurse yelling, "She's military! What are you doing?" And most damning of all, it caught the officers ignoring every word Tamika said. It didn't matter that she was in uniform. Didn't matter that she showed ID. Didn't matter that she had done everything right. Within 6 hours, the video had 80,000 views. Within 12, it had 400,000. By the next morning, it had hit over 1 million. Hashtag number cuffed in uniform exploded across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. It was quoted by veterans, shared by celebrities, picked up by politicians. If a black woman in uniform isn't safe from profiling, who is? Congresswoman Latrice Moore. This is a disgrace. The uniform deserves respect, no matter who wears it. Retired Major General Terrence Holloway. They saw her skin, not her service. Twitter comment liked 180,000 times. At her house, Tamika was still trying to breathe. She hadn't posted anything, hadn't given a statement. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted peace. But peace had fled, and in its place, hundreds of missed calls, text messages, and interview requests. CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post. They all wanted her voice. She hadn't decided if she wanted to give it. Inside the Columbus Police Department, the chief sat stone-faced in a closed-door meeting. The internal affairs report had come back. It was bad. Failure to verify identification, violation of protocol involving active service members, use of force without probable cause, unprofessional conduct recorded on body cam. The chief didn't need a press release to know what was coming. 2 terminations. Immediate. Dorsey had tried to argue, claimed he feared impersonation, said she was acting defensive, claimed she didn't comply fast enough. But the footage didn't lie. Tamika had complied. She had stood still. She had said all the right things, and they cuffed her anyway. Linford didn't argue. He said nothing. Just signed the termination papers and walked out of the room. No badge, no goodbyes. Back at the Sinclair station, a news van was parked by Pump 3. The reporter adjusted her mic, glancing at her phone. Live in 5. Across the street, someone had taped Tamika's picture to a utility pole with the words, "We see you. We believe you." Inside a bakery nearby, 2 veterans sat with coffee and silence. One of them, a man in his 60s with graying sideburns and a bronze star pinned to his jacket, finally spoke. 15 years in, I never once got cuffed in uniform. The other nodded. Wonder why that is. That evening, Tamika sat at her dining table, still in her fatigues. Her boots were lined up by the door. She hadn't moved much all day, hadn't needed to. The world was moving for her. Her phone lit up again. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. But one message made her pause. Sergeant Drury, this is Officer Reeves. I wasn't on shift that day. I just wanted to say, I've watched the footage 10 times. I'm sorry, I'm going to do better. She didn't reply. Not yet. But she saved the message. A few blocks away, candles flickered in front of the reserve base. No signs, no chanting, just silent figures standing in the cold. One of them, a woman with deep lines in her face and old fatigues on her shoulders, held a sign that simply read, "We know what she stood for. Do you?" Back inside, Tamika walked to her mirror. She looked at her reflection for a long time. Not at her face. At her name patch. At the uniform she had earned. They had tried to reduce her to a threat, to a profile, to a skin color. But the world had seen something else, and the world had answered. Chapter 6. Spin Control. The next morning, a memo circulated through City Hall. Emergency press briefing. 11 a.m. Topic: Officer Conduct and Community Response. The mayor had been silent long enough. He knew it. His staff knew it. The voters knew it. Silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was fuel. Every minute the city refused to speak, the public filled the vacuum themselves. By 10:30 a.m., reporters lined the hallway outside the briefing room. Lights were rigged, cameras tested. The backdrop bore the seal of the city of Gahanna with the motto, "Honor in Action." A cruel irony considering what had unfolded 2 days earlier. At exactly 11, the mayor entered, flanked by the police chief and a community liaison who looked as uncomfortable as he did determined. The statement was short, scripted, painfully neutral. This city does not condone profiling of any kind. An internal investigation was conducted. Appropriate personnel actions have been taken. We are in communication with military leadership, and we are committed to transparency and accountability. No questions allowed, no names mentioned, no mention of the video, no apology. The media called it a non-statement. Meanwhile, at Tamika's house, the doorbell rang for the third time that morning. She didn't answer. The blinds were drawn, her phone was off, and her uniform hung neatly in the hallway closet, untouched. She hadn't put it back on since the incident. Not out of shame, but because she refused to let it be part of anyone's headline. That uniform had been hers for 12 years. Now it belonged to everyone else's narrative. Inside the reserve base, a different conversation unfolded. At the noon debrief, word of the incident was no longer whispers. It was policy, new memos, revised protocols, a direct line established between the base and city law enforcement for ID verification, joint response teams being proposed. The base commander called it a moment of necessary friction. Others called it what it was, a disgrace. In the mess hall, soldiers huddled in groups over coffee and trays of food. "She got cuffed wearing what we're wearing now," someone said. "If that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is." Tamika's name was no longer just a name. It was a point of reference, a cautionary tale, a line in the sand. Back at City Hall, another internal meeting took place behind closed doors. This one wasn't for press. It was for accountability, or at least the illusion of it. A senior official from the Office of Police Oversight placed a folder on the table. Inside, body cam footage, witness statements, internal reports. "This didn't start with the video," she said, "but that's what ended the denial." The board members flipped through the pages, silent, uneasy. "How long until people forget?" one of them asked. The oversight official didn't blink. "The question isn't when they'll forget. It's what we do before they remember again." That night, Tamika finally stepped outside. The air was colder than before, winter creeping in early. She wore a hoodie and jeans, civilian clothes, no name tag, no boots, just Tamika. She walked 4 blocks to the corner store. Inside, the cashier gave her a look, not one of judgment, but of recognition. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. As she turned to leave, a woman near the fridge section called out, "You're her, right?" Tamika stopped. "The soldier from the video?" She nodded once. The woman stepped closer, eyes wide with emotion. "I just wanted to say, you held it together. I don't know if I could have." Tamika gave her a tired smile. "Some days I didn't think I could either." Later that evening, she finally turned her phone back on. Hundreds of messages poured in. Most were kind, a few weren't. She didn't respond to any of them, except one. A letter from a girl named Darla Reynolds, 19, ROTC cadet, scared to enlist, scared of being seen before being respected. "I watched the video. You didn't yell. You didn't curse. You didn't back down. And now I know I can do this. Thank you for not letting them rewrite what a soldier looks like." Tamika read it 3 times. Then she folded the screen shut and whispered, "That's why it mattered." The next morning, she put on her running shoes. No uniform, no fanfare. Just the pavement, her breath, and the rhythm of healing. For now, that was enough. But she knew the story wasn't over. The system had been forced to look at itself. And Tamika, she wasn't waiting for their apology. She was watching who would change. Chapter 7. They knew her name now. Tamika's name was everywhere. She hadn't spoken to a single reporter. She hadn't posted anything online. And yet her face, the still from the viral video where she stood calm, cuffed, and unyielding, was on TV screens, news articles, and protest posters across the country. Cuffed for serving, black, brave, disrespected. Justice for Tamika. She hadn't asked for this spotlight, but she understood now. There were people watching who needed to see that calm wasn't weakness, that stillness wasn't submission. Because her silence on camera hadn't meant nothing. It had meant control. And control in moments like that was power. Across Columbus, high school classrooms paused for a few minutes between lessons to discuss the case. At one public school in Reynoldsburg, a government teacher played the viral video on the projector and asked, "What do you see? Not just what happened, but why it happened, and why it keeps happening." Students raised hands hesitantly at first. Then the room filled with voices, anger, questions, some confusion, some clarity. They weren't just studying history anymore. They were watching it. Meanwhile, in the police department's internal review board, the fallout continued. Officer Dorsey was gone. Officer Linford, too. But their removal didn't erase what had happened. At the precinct, whispers floated in corners. Some officers muttered that Dorsey had just made a bad call. Others argued it was long overdue, that the way some patrols treated people of color had gone unchecked for years. Officer Reeves, the young man who had messaged Tamika privately, found himself defending her at the lunch table. "She had ID. She was calm. She was right," he said to a group of officers leaning around a bench. One of them sneered. "Public pressure fired them, not justice." Reeves shook his head. "Same difference when you're in cuffs for nothing." No one replied after that. Back at Tamika's home, the mail started coming in. Not bills, not flyers, but handwritten letters, emails printed and sent by strangers, veterans from across the country, young girls in ROTC, a retired Navy chief who said he'd never seen anyone wear the uniform with more dignity under pressure. One envelope, addressed simply to "the woman who stood still," held a single line inside. "You didn't raise your voice. You raised ours." On the third day after the incident, Tamika drove, not in uniform but in a simple jacket and jeans, to the VFW Hall in Reynoldsburg. A group of older veterans had invited her. No cameras, no speeches, just coffee, folding chairs, and quiet. Inside, she was greeted with slow nods and firm handshakes. A woman in her 70s saluted. A man with a prosthetic leg patted her shoulder and said, "You reminded us what bearing looks like." Tamika sat, took the offered cup of black coffee, and let herself breathe. Someone asked gently, "Do you want to talk about it?" She looked around, men and women of every background, all older, all quiet, all watching her with patience, not pity. She spoke. "I didn't want to go viral. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted gas, a protein bar, and to get to drill on time." A small laugh spread around the room. She continued. "But I couldn't ignore it either. Not because I was angry, but because I know someone's daughter was watching, and I don't want her to think silence is the answer." Someone clapped. Then another. But Tamika held up her hand. "I don't want applause," she said. "I want change." That night at City Hall, a quiet shift began. New guidelines were drafted. Officers were required to receive additional training on interacting with military personnel. A liaison role was created between the police department and the nearest reserve base. None of it was announced publicly, but it happened. In the chief's office, a deputy handed over a printout of the new internal memo and said, "Too late for prevention, but maybe not too late for reflection." On the internet, the hashtag faded, as hashtags do. But what remained was harder to erase, dozens of saved clips, reactions, and comments that had burrowed into people's consciousness. Tamika didn't post a statement. She didn't need to, because her image, standing tall in her uniform, hands behind her back, gaze unwavering, had already spoken louder than anything she could write. And they knew her name now. Chapter 8. Echoes and Embers. The story had left the news cycle. The trending hashtags slowed, the retweets thinned out, comment sections quieted down. But Tamika felt none of that silence. It was in the eyes of people in the grocery store. The hesitation before someone said, "Thank you for your service." The side glances from strangers trying to figure out if she was that woman from the video. At the post office, an older white man bumped her arm in line and said, "I saw what happened. Damn shame." Shouldn't have to go through that. Not in uniform. He meant well. She nodded politely. 2 aisles later, someone else whispered not so quietly to their friend. That's her. Tamika didn't flinch. She had learned to live in the echo. One morning, as she returned from a run, she found a folded letter slid under her front door. No envelope, no name, just a single sheet of white paper with a typed message. Sergeant Drury, we extend a formal apology for the actions taken against you on March 12th. An internal review confirmed multiple violations of protocol. The officers involved have been terminated. This letter does not undo what occurred, but it marks the beginning of our acknowledgement. At the bottom, a printed name. Chief Alan D. Reddick, no signature. No handwritten note. Tamika stared at it for a long time. Then she folded the paper in half and placed it inside a drawer. She didn't need to display it. She didn't need to post it. She just needed it to exist. Proof that even if the system came late, it had come. A week later, she received an invitation to speak at a city council meeting. She declined. Politely. She didn't owe them a statement. They had said enough on her behalf. Instead, she drove out to a local middle school where her godmother taught history. The students had been studying current events, and Tamika had agreed to sit in quietly during a class discussion. She didn't say much, but when a student asked, "What made you stay calm?" Tamika replied simply, "Because I knew they were wrong, and I wasn't going to let them trick me into acting like they were right." The room went quiet. Even the teacher paused. Sometimes the truth didn't need shouting. It needed stillness. Later that night, she stopped by the Sinclair station. She hadn't returned since the day of the incident. The pumps were the same. The pavement still cracked. The security cameras new. 4 of them, placed high on the awning, blinking red. She filled her tank. No one approached her. But when she walked inside to pay for a bottle of water, the clerk looked up with wide eyes. You don't have to pay for that," he said quickly. "It's on the house." Tamika arched a brow. "It's just water." He nodded fast. "I know. Just, thank you." She gave him a tired smile. "You're welcome. But next time, just say it without the free bottle." He laughed nervously as she walked out. That weekend, Byron came by with ribs. They sat on her porch, smoke rising from the takeout containers between them, paper towels stacked in a messy pile. It felt like old times, before she became the headline. Byron chewed, then said around a bite, "You know what I keep thinking? That you want more sauce?" "That too. But no, I keep thinking how quiet you were through all of this." Tamika shrugged. "Not my job to make noise, just to hold the line." He nodded. That's what made it powerful. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn gold, then gray. Across the city, change continued, not loudly, not visibly, but steadily. Officer training modules were updated. Military ID protocol was revised. A new community liaison was hired. Monthly roundtables between law enforcement and service members were scheduled. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Tamika didn't attend any of the meetings, but she read the notes, every single one, because surviving something like this didn't mean you lived in it forever. It meant you watched what came next. On Sunday morning, she received a voice memo from a girl named Zoe, a recent recruit who had just finished basic. "We watched your video in class. Our instructor said, that's what military bearing looks like. Thought you should know." Tamika didn't reply, but she saved the message, and for the first time in weeks, she opened her closet, looked at her uniform, and smiled. Chapter 9. Standing without a stage. The following Monday, Tamika woke to a sky full of spring haze and the sound of birds reclaiming the rooftops. It had been over 2 weeks since the incident. Time had stretched and folded strangely, days slipping by like fogged glass. But something inside her had shifted, not completely healed, but steady. Her inbox was quieter now, fewer media requests, no more doorbell interruptions, just silence, the kind she had been craving. Until her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a new message appeared. Ms. Drury, this is Lisa Cormack with the National Military Honors Foundation. We'd like to speak with you regarding a recognition award. We believe what you endured and how you handled it reflects the highest level of integrity. Tamika didn't respond. She wasn't sure how she felt about recognition. She hadn't been seeking a medal for surviving something she should never have had to endure. And yet, she understood the weight of being visible, especially to young women who looked like her, especially to those who hadn't stepped into uniform yet and needed to know that it was still worth it. Later that afternoon, she walked to the mailbox. Bills. A voter registration flyer. One envelope stood out. Cream-colored, handwritten, no return address. She opened it slowly on the porch steps. Dear Sergeant Drury, I'm the daughter of a Vietnam vet. My dad always told me the uniform was armor, that no one could question you once you put it on. I watched your video with him. He cried, not because you were hurt, but because they treated you like the uniform wasn't enough. He told me, I fought for her to be able to wear that with pride, and they tried to strip it from her. I just wanted you to know. We see you. We honor you. You didn't flinch, and because of that, you made them look at themselves. Mia Longley, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Tamika folded the letter gently. No tears came, but her chest felt tight in a way that wasn't pain. It was recognition, from someone who understood that battles weren't always fought with weapons. The city had changed in small, quiet ways. The Sinclair station now had a posted sign. Recording devices welcome. Public oversight encouraged. It was subtle, but deliberate. Patrol officers had begun wearing visible ID cards, clipped to their uniforms, even during off-street calls. The police department, under pressure from local groups and internal advocacy, had adopted a new slogan on its website. Respect is a standard, not a reward. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That evening, Tamika got a call she did answer. Byron. You hear about the student town hall? He asked. No. High schoolers downtown. Want you to speak. Tamika groaned lightly. Why me? Because they asked for you by name. 2 days later, she stood in a gymnasium converted into a makeshift auditorium. Rows of students sat cross-legged on the floor. Some wore ROTC uniforms. Others held signs. Not protest signs, but words of support. Strength looks like you. Calm is power. Honor can't be handcuffed. Tamika didn't take the stage. She stood at ground level, microphone in hand, heart beating steady. She told them the truth. She didn't dramatize it, didn't water it down. She told them what it felt like to be judged before being heard, to be dismissed while doing everything right, to be seen as a problem before being seen as a person. And then she told them what happened next, how strangers stood up, how voices recorded what others wanted to erase, how change, slow and imperfect, had begun, not because she shouted, but because she stood. Afterward, a teenage boy approached her quietly. I'm joining next year, he said. I wasn't sure before. Thought I'd be treated different. Tamika looked him in the eyes. You will be. Sometimes. But different doesn't mean you don't belong. They'll learn. Or they'll be replaced. He nodded, eyes wide. I'll remember that. Good. She smiled. Then I did my job. That night she sat alone in her living room, a cup of tea in one hand, her uniform folded neatly on the arm of the couch. It wasn't stained, it wasn't torn. It had survived, just like her. She leaned back and whispered to no one, They don't get to take this from me. And outside, the city breathed a little easier. Not because the fight was over, but because someone had shown them how to stand when it began. Chapter 10. Uniforms and unspoken rules. The next time Tamika wore her uniform in public, it wasn't for drill. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that used to mean laundry and errands. The air was cool, soft sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. She needed groceries and decided, without hesitation, to wear her fatigues. It wasn't about proving anything, it was about reclaiming something. When she stepped into the local grocery store, the rhythm of movement around her slowed. Aisle conversations dipped in volume. People looked, some with recognition, some with curiosity, and others with a complicated mixture of admiration and discomfort. A woman with a toddler nodded at her politely. A teenage cashier stiffened behind the counter, eyes wide. Tamika didn't react. She pushed her cart past the fruit section and into frozen foods when it happened. A man, maybe in his late 40s, white business casual, brushed past her too closely. He muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Media soldier." She stopped, not to confront, but to listen. He didn't look back. Tamika exhaled slowly, adjusted her grip on the cart, and moved on. That kind of comment no longer stuck the way it used to. It didn't pierce. It bounced. Because somewhere in the sea of opinions and noise, she had built armor that wasn't made of fabric or rank. It was clarity. She didn't need the world's permission to wear what she had earned. Outside, she loaded groceries into her RAV4. A car passed by slowly and honked once. The driver gave her a thumbs up through the window. She gave a nod. The small things, nonverbal, uncomplicated, mattered more now. Back home, she found an envelope tucked into her mailbox. This one had a return address. Office of Community Relations, City of Gahanna. Inside was a printed document with a seal and signature. Effective immediately, the City of Gahanna will include military identification verification as a required step during traffic stops or field interviews. This policy applies regardless of uniformed status. Thank you for your role in helping establish this change. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't broadcast on every network. But it was official, tangible. Tamika placed it in the same drawer as the police apology letter. She didn't frame these things. They weren't trophies. They were receipts. Later that day, she got a call from her mother. "Baby, I saw your name in the paper again." "Which one?" Tamika chuckled. "The good one. They were praising your speech to those students." "I didn't say anything they didn't already know." Her mother's voice softened. "But you said it as someone who lived it. That's different." Tamika leaned against the kitchen counter. "I just don't want people thinking I'm the exception." "You're not, but you're visible, and that means something." That evening, a friend from her unit stopped by. Private Bennett, young, sharp, a few months out of basic. She stood in the doorway holding a folder awkwardly. "Sarge, I got accepted to officer candidate school." Tamika's eyes lit up. "That's huge." Bennett grinned. "I wasn't going to apply, but then, the video, the way you handled everything, I figured if you could deal with all that and still want to serve, so can I." Tamika stepped aside and motioned her in. "Come on in. You're going to tell me everything." They sat at the dining table, reviewing her application packet, going over questions, strategies, and nerves. For the first time in weeks, Tamika felt something new, hope. Not for herself, for what came next. At midnight, after Bennett left, Tamika stepped outside and sat on her porch. No cameras, no flashlights, just the hush of suburban night. The wind moved gently through the trees. She closed her eyes and listened. Not for sirens, not for footsteps, but for her own heartbeat. It was steady. She didn't feel finished, but she felt intact. There was still work to do, still conversations that needed to happen, still systems that resisted change. But tonight, none of that pressed on her shoulders. Tonight, she sat in the quiet and let herself believe what so many had been trying to tell her, that her calm had mattered, that her restraint had spoken louder than anger ever could, that the uniform still meant something because of people like her who refused to let it be dragged through the mud without standing tall in it. And as she watched a neighbor's porch light flicker out, she whispered softly, "Still standing." Chapter 12. Ripples in the silence. The inbox notifications never stopped. Not all at once, but steadily, like drips from a cracked faucet. Most were heartfelt messages. A few were cruel. Some were confused. But there was one thing they all had in common. They expected Tamika to say something, to speak up, to speak out, to become the face of a movement she hadn't asked to lead. And maybe that was the part that unnerved her most. She had never set out to be a symbol. She just hadn't wanted to be erased. And yet, now people were waiting for a statement, a post, a speech. But Tamika knew that not every act of courage needed a microphone. Sometimes presence was the loudest protest. She took a walk that morning through downtown Gahanna. No hat, no uniform, just jeans and a light jacket. Her hair pulled back, her pace unhurried. She passed the Sinclair station, now fitted with new surveillance cameras and a fresh coat of paint on the pump islands. It almost looked normal. But she could still feel the weight of that morning, how the cold had settled in her bones as the cuffs clicked, how her voice had bounced back at her inside the cruiser, unheard. And yet here she stood, feet steady on the same pavement, unshaken. As she passed the bus stop near the corner, a middle-aged woman in scrubs waved at her. "Hey," she called softly. Tamika turned. "I saw you," the woman said. "That day. I was yelling from the other pump." Recognition sparked. Tamika stepped closer. "Scrubs. I remember." The woman grinned. "Patrice." They shook hands, a slow, firm shake. "You weren't alone that day," Patrice said. "I just wanted you to know that." Tamika nodded. "Thanks. That matters more than you think." They talked for a few minutes. Nothing heavy, just the kind of conversation that heals. And when the bus arrived, Patrice stepped aboard, gave a small salute, and disappeared behind the closing doors. Tamika stood there a moment longer before moving on. Back home, she sat at her kitchen table and opened a blank document on her laptop. Not for the press, not for social media, for herself. She began writing letters to the 16-year-old in Georgia, to the ROTC cadet from Texas, to the nurse in Missouri who had written about her grandfather's reaction to the video. Each letter was handwritten, nothing grand, just words. "You belong. Your presence is powerful. Don't let anyone define the uniform for you." She mailed 6 that day, and 6 more the day after. By midweek, she received an invitation from the city. A new task force was being assembled, community leaders, veterans, and law enforcement, to develop ongoing reform and accountability structures. The mayor's office wanted her to join. She read the email twice, then hit delete. She didn't need another room full of people using her name to justify their inaction. If they wanted to change, they would. She had already done her part. At the reserve base that weekend, her commanding officer pulled her aside. "You're clear for promotion," he said. "We've had it on file for a while." Tamika raised an eyebrow. "And now it's just surfacing?" He cleared his throat. "Timing wasn't ideal before, but command wants to fast-track it now." She gave him a look that could slice granite. "I don't want it because I became viral." He nodded. "You earned it. Long before any of this. That's why we're offering it." She said nothing at first, then slowly, "Then I'll take it. But don't put my face in the newsletter." "Understood." That evening, a small celebration was held in the unit lounge. Nothing big, just pizza, a few toasts, and plenty of awkward attempts to avoid mentioning the video. One soldier stood up, raised a can of soda. "To Sergeant First Class Drury," he said, emphasizing the new rank, "who taught us that stillness doesn't mean silence, Tamika gave a soft smile. She didn't toast back. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Later that night, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror. Her new rank patch rested on her shoulder, still fresh. She stared at it for a while, hand gently pressing the fabric. The reflection didn't show someone changed. It showed someone revealed. Not by the uniform, but by the way she wore it under pressure. And in that quiet moment, Tamika whispered a truth to herself no headline could capture. I'm not their symbol, I'm my own. I'm my... Chapter 11. The Cost of Calm. Tamika had been back on base for a week. It was her first drill weekend since the incident, and though the building, the routine, and even the smell of waxed floors were familiar, something had undeniably changed. Not in her, in them. Fellow reservists approached her differently now, some with subtle nods of respect, others with quiet deference. Even those who used to keep their distance now greeted her with a simple, "Good to see you, Sergeant." She wasn't sure if it was admiration or guilt. Maybe both. During morning formation, her name was called last, not out of punishment, but of punctuation. When she stepped forward, even the first sergeant gave her a longer than usual look. "Welcome back, Drury." "Glad to be here, First Sergeant." But she wasn't really. Not completely. She didn't say that out loud. During a break, she found herself alone in the locker room, staring into the mirror. Her camouflage uniform fit the same. Her name tape still rested above her heart. But something inside her felt out of place, like she was occupying a space too small for the weight she now carried. Behind her, a voice spoke. "They didn't deserve your silence." She turned. It was Staff Sergeant Williams, one of the few women who outranked her on base. Tamika tilted her head. Silence was the only thing they couldn't twist. Williams nodded slowly. "Still, you shouldn't have had to carry it like that." There was a pause before Williams added, "What they did, it wasn't just about race. It was about erasure, like you didn't exist." Tamika felt that, deep in her chest. "But I do," she replied quietly. "Damn right you do." That evening, as they wrapped up drills and loaded gear, Tamika noticed a small group of younger soldiers whispering nearby. They weren't mocking, they were reverent. One of them, barely out of high school, caught her eye and stiffened. She approached them. "Y'all got something to say?" she asked, not harshly but directly. The youngest cleared his throat. "Ma'am, just wanted to say, the way you handled it. That's what leadership looks like." She blinked, then offered a short nod. Leadership is knowing when to speak and when to stand still. He nodded back. "Yes, ma'am." They watched her walk away like she'd just given a sermon. She hadn't. She was still figuring it all out herself. That night, Byron called. "I've got something you should see." He sent a link. A news outlet had released the body cam audio, unedited, in full. The video showed Tamika offering her ID, the officer barely glancing, then cuffing her. But the audio, that was what changed things. In the final moments, before muting, the officer had said, "You think she's one of those fake vets? Let her cool off in the car." And now, the public knew he had said it too. Tamika watched the footage, her expression unchanged. She had lived that moment. Watching it from the outside didn't sting anymore. It validated what she already knew. "It's ugly," Byron said, "but it's truth. And now it's public record." Tamika stared at the screen. They thought no one would hear. But they forgot who was listening. The department released a second statement the next morning. This time, it named names. Dorsey and Linford had been terminated for cause, with violations including failure to follow identification verification protocol, unprofessional conduct, racially biased behavior, misuse of authority. It didn't make headlines this time, but for Tamika, it was enough. Not vengeance, not justice, just consequences. And consequences mattered. That weekend, a group of veterans organized a small candlelight vigil outside the State House. No banners, no chants, just presence. Tamika stood at the edge of the crowd in civilian clothes. Someone handed her a candle. She didn't ask who. She just took it, lit the wick, and stood silently with the others. An older woman in a faded Marine Corps hoodie stood beside her. "They said I was too loud," she whispered. You were quiet, but you still made them listen." Tamika turned. "I wasn't trying to be quiet. I was trying to be heard, without screaming." The woman nodded. And it worked. Later that night, Tamika returned home to find a new letter in her mailbox from a 16-year-old girl in Georgia. "I used to think I wasn't strong enough for the military. I thought they'd tear me down for being a girl, for being black. But then I saw you, and I realized strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just stillness. I'm enlisting next year. Because of you." Tamika closed the letter and stared at the floor. The cost of her calm had been heavy, but if it bought someone else the courage to rise, then maybe it had been worth it. Chapter 13. The Things They Don't Teach You. The first time Tamika stepped into a classroom after the incident, it wasn't as a student. It was as a guest. The invitation had come from a local college professor teaching a class on criminal justice reform. They'd been studying body cam laws, racial profiling, and public accountability. The professor wanted Tamika to speak, not as a victim, but as someone who had lived in the fine print between law and discretion. She had said no at first, then yes, because saying no felt like silence, and silence had already taken too much. When she arrived on campus, the air was full of energy. Backpacks slung over shoulders, students sipping overpriced lattes, someone skateboarding way too fast past the library steps. She walked in full uniform, not for effect, but for truth. Some students stared. A few whispered. One or two pulled out their phones. She kept walking. Inside the classroom, it was quiet. The professor introduced her with care. "This is Sergeant First Class Tamika Drury. She's here to speak to you about reality, beyond policy, beyond theory. Please listen like it matters." Tamika stepped to the front, looked out over the rows of young faces and said, "I'm not here to give you a speech. I'm here to tell you what they don't teach in training." She didn't sugarcoat it. She talked about standing on asphalt with cuffs on, heart steady while the world questioned her right to wear the uniform. She described the sound of silence from the officer who stood by and said nothing. The burn in her shoulders, the way breath can become a strategy, and how calm isn't weakness, it's discipline. "People say I was brave," she told them, "but I was just ready. Ready for the moment, not because I wanted it, because I trained for everything else, and this happened anyway." Hands rose slowly. One student asked, "Would you do it all the same way again?" Tamika paused, then nodded. "Yeah, because the hardest thing to do is not react when you're being tested in front of people who want you to fail." After class, a girl with a notebook clutched to her chest approached. "I want to be a state trooper," she said, eyes wide, "but I'm scared. What if they look at me and only see, my hair, my skin?" Tamika met her gaze. "Then you walk in knowing your own worth, because no uniform or badge will protect you if you don't claim that first." The girl nodded, blinking fast. Tamika added gently, "And don't just be the cop you wish had shown up for you. Be the cop who never forgets what silence costs." Back on base, things had settled. Mostly. Her name was no longer whispered. Her presence no longer drew stares. She had become, once again, a part of the machine. But now, when she spoke during briefings, people listened. When she corrected someone, they responded. Not just because of her rank, because she had earned it, twice, once in service, once in silence. At her next drill weekend, she noticed something new. A bulletin board by the mess hall now displayed a new poster. Protocol update. All ID checks involving service members must be documented. Confirmation steps are required. We protect each other, on and off duty. It didn't mention her name, but it didn't have to. That evening, Tamika sat on the bleachers behind the base gym, legs stretched out, watching the sun dip below the treetops. Byron joined her, tossing a water bottle her way. "You're hard to catch these days," he said, taking a seat beside her. She shrugged. "Just keeping my head down. Turns out fame doesn't pay very well." He chuckled. "You started something, whether you wanted to or not." She nodded slowly. "I know." A beat passed. "You ready for what comes next?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, because next was a hard thing to predict. But finally she said, "I'm ready to make sure they're ready, because next time it might be someone without a camera, without a colonel to call, without a crowd to shout back." Byron leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You're not just a soldier, Tamika. You're a witness." She glanced at him. "And witnesses hold the line." When she got home that night, she found another letter waiting. This one came from a high school teacher in Tulsa. "Dear S.F.C. Drury, I played your video for my seniors." They didn't cry. They didn't cheer. They understood. Because you showed them what it looks like to be dignified in the face of humiliation. You changed the way they see authority. You reminded them that strength isn't about volume. It's about resolve. Tamika folded the letter and set it next to the others. She didn't save them for ego. She saved them for clarity. Because in moments where she doubted whether her silence had been enough, she could read them and remember. She hadn't been quiet. She'd just spoken in a language people hadn't been used to hearing. And now, they were learning to listen. Chapter 14. The uniform still fits. The morning of the ceremony arrived with an overcast sky and air heavy with early spring chill. Tamika stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing out the front of her uniform. It felt familiar again, natural, like muscle memory. Her name patch was crisp. Her new rank stitched perfectly. Today wasn't about her arrest. It wasn't about the video. It wasn't even about what had happened afterward. Today was about continuity. Proof that she was still standing, still serving, and still claiming her place in a system that had tried, however briefly, to eject her from it. She didn't need celebration, but she accepted this one, not for the applause, but for the message it sent. You didn't erase me. I'm still here. At the military hall on base, folding chairs were lined in straight rows and a few dozen faces filled them. Fellow soldiers, officers, family members, and a handful of community leaders. Nothing grand, nothing excessive, but enough. Byron stood near the back, arms crossed, proud without smiling. Tamika stepped forward when her name was called. Her boots echoed across the floor like they always had, measured, confident, calm. The commanding officer spoke briefly. Service doesn't always mean medals. Sometimes it means perseverance. Sometimes it means holding the line in ways others don't see until much later. And then her name rang out. Sergeant First Class Tamika Drury. She accepted the recognition with a firm handshake and no fanfare, no dramatic nods, no teary words. She didn't need them. The uniform still fit, and so did the purpose behind it. After the event, as people mingled, one of the junior officers approached her. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, we watched you. We learned from you." She tilted her head. "From a video?" He smiled. "From what came after it?" Tamika nodded once. "Then keep learning." She left before the coffee went cold. She had somewhere else to be. Across town, a local high school was holding a mock town hall event. The students had been studying civil liberties and community reform. A few had written essays about her story, some thoughtful, some angry, all honest. They had invited her to close the event. When she arrived, the auditorium lights were dimmed and the students were quiet, leaning forward with the attention that adults often dismissed. Tamika stood center stage. No notes, no slides, just the truth. "You've probably heard what happened to me," she began, voice steady. "But let me tell you what didn't happen." The room stilled. "I didn't panic, I didn't shout, and I didn't let their fear define my dignity." She let that sit for a moment. Because sometimes the loudest resistance is just being visible and unmoving when someone wants you to disappear. Afterward, one student raised his hand. "Did you ever think about leaving the military?" She considered that. "I thought about whether it would leave me first," she said. "But no, I stayed because I didn't want the people who judged me by my skin to be the only ones shaping what the uniform stands for." There was a pause, then a slow ripple of applause. Not wild, not performative, just earned. Back at home that evening, she finally unpacked a box she had been ignoring since the incident. Inside were old photos, boot camp, graduation, first deployment, early promotions, a visual timeline of her journey, untouched for years. She held one photo longer than the rest. It was of her, standing in front of her barracks, holding her helmet under her arm. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. The confidence in her eyes had said everything. That version of herself had never expected to become a public figure, but she had expected resistance. Tamika looked at the photo, then whispered, "You knew." Later that night, she stood at the sink washing dishes when the doorbell rang. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Hensley, from 2 doors down. Gray curls, glasses perched on her nose, and a trembling hand holding a plastic container. "I made cobbler," she said. "Wanted to say I'm glad you're still in uniform." Tamika blinked. "Thank you." "You handled yourself better than I would have," the woman said. "You reminded me of someone I served with. Vietnam. He never raised his voice, but he always got heard." Tamika smiled gently. "That's the goal." She accepted the cobbler, and they exchanged a quiet nod before Mrs. Hensley returned down the path. Tamika sat that night on her porch, spooning warm blueberry cobbler from a bowl and looking up at the stars. Not for answers, for stillness. And in that moment, she didn't feel broken or bruised or burdened. She just felt here, whole, present, clear. And quietly, she said aloud, "The uniform still fits, and so do I." Chapter 15. What remains? Weeks passed. Spring warmed into early summer, and the trees that once stood bare on Morse Road now carried full green crowns. The Sinclair station looked the same, ordinary, anonymous, forgettable to anyone who didn't know what had happened there. But for those who did, it would never just be a gas station again. Tamika passed it often now, sometimes on her way to base, sometimes just driving without a destination. And every time she glanced at Pump 4, the spot where her breath turned to steam and her voice had been ignored. The asphalt was still cracked, the cameras were new, but the echo remained. Not a wound, not anymore, just a marker. She didn't talk about the incident much anymore. She didn't have to. Others did. Her name came up in training modules at the academy. Recruits were shown the footage, then asked to explain what went wrong, why they hesitated, why they believed the uniform was a disguise instead of a declaration. Some failed the exercise. Some passed. Tamika didn't care about the test scores. She cared about the pause that came after the video ended, when cadets sat in silence, knowing they could have been the officer who got it wrong. That pause was the beginning of accountability. In her quiet moments, Tamika returned to the things that grounded her. She ran in the mornings again, headphones in, rhythm steady, path familiar. She cooked more, often trying her godmother's gumbo recipe and never quite getting it right. She wrote letters to new recruits who reached out from across the country. Not long ones, just enough to say, "You belong. Don't let them tell you otherwise." And slowly, her life returned to normal. Or a new kind of normal. One where people whispered less and listened more. Then one day, a package arrived at her door. No sender listed. Inside was a thick folder, a flash drive, and a typed letter. Sergeant First Class Drury enclosed is a full copy of the internal review, including transcriptions, audio records, and independent findings. We believe you should have what we never expected to give. Truth. In full. Sincerely, Office of Civil Accountability. Tamika read the report in silence. She already knew what it would say. But there was something powerful about holding it in her hands. Proof that what happened wasn't a misunderstanding or an overreaction. It was documented, detailed, undeniable. She placed the folder in the drawer with the apology letter, the new policy notice, and the handwritten notes from girls who had once doubted they could serve. And she whispered, not with bitterness, but with resolve. It mattered. Later that week, she visited a local community center. They were hosting a youth leadership workshop, and someone had invited her to stop by. She hadn't planned to speak. She just wanted to observe, blend in, breathe. But a girl in the front row recognized her. The same wide-eyed recognition Tamika had seen before. The kind that said, "You're more than a story. I see myself in you." So Tamika stood up. "Leadership," she said, "isn't about volume. It's about knowing who you are when someone tries to strip that away." The room stayed quiet. She smiled. "It's about standing still, even when standing still makes them nervous." And with that, she sat down again. No applause, just eyes that now saw her more clearly. On the way out, an older man, one of the volunteers, caught her by the door. "You changed something," he said. "Maybe not everything, but something." Tamika nodded. "That's enough for me." That night she returned home and sat on her porch, just like she had after the first long days. But now, there was no media, no lights, no tension. Just her. And peace. The moon was rising slow, casting silver across her front steps. Crickets hummed in the grass. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, letting herself remember. Not the pain, not the cuffs, but the control she never surrendered. Because that was her victory, not the firings, not the headlines, not the praise, just the fact that she stood still, unshaken, and made them see her anyway. And somewhere, across the country, maybe across the world, a girl was lacing up her boots for the first time, pressing her name patch onto her chest, walking into a space that wouldn't always respect her. But she would walk anyway, because she had seen Tamika, and now she knew how to stand.